Imagine walking into an old, disused bank vault. You know, it's dusty, quiet, maybe smells a bit musty like old paper and concrete.
Yeah, that kind of atmosphere.
You're expecting to find, I don't know, forgotten files, maybe some old equipment.
Right, nothing out of the ordinary.
But instead, you're hit by this just awful, overpowering, sickening smell. And inside, stacked up, are 6 plastic barrels.
And not filled with old coins or anything like that, no. Filled with acid and human remains.
Just horrific.
That scene, which police walked into in Snowtown, South Australia, back in May 1999, that was basically the moment the lid was blown off Australia's worst, most infamous serial killing case.
And it wasn't just the 8 bodies they eventually found in those barrels, was it? That discovery led them to more.
Exactly. It ultimately connected the dots to 2 more victims buried elsewhere. Uncovered a total of 12 murders linked to this group.
If we're really going to try and unpack the information we've got here, pull out the key facts, the timeline, which is just grim, the individuals involved, and just the chilling details of what became known as the bodies in barrels murders.
And we're talking about a period of terror that stretched, believe it or not, from August 1992 right up until that discovery in May 1999.
Wow, years.
Years. And it's really important to stress this point. While the name Snowtown is stuck to the case because, well, that's where the barrels were found.
The discovery point.
Precisely. Most of the victims, the vast majority, were actually targeted and murdered in Adelaide's northern suburbs. Snowtown? It basically served as the final gruesome storage site, and only one of the murders actually happened there.
Okay, so let's talk about who was behind this nightmare. The core group, according to the sources, seems to be John Bunting. He's identified as the ringleader, right?
Absolutely, the central figure. Then you have Robert Wagner, James and Vlassakis, and Mark Hayden.
Bunting. Tell us a bit about him. The material points to a pretty disturbing background.
Yeah, it does. There's mention of a childhood assault. He later worked in an abattoir, and there are accounts suggesting he actually enjoyed it, even boasted about slaughtering animals.
Oh, wow.
And this seems to have twisted into this, virulent hatred, particularly aimed at people he labeled pedophiles or homosexuals. The descriptions paint him as charismatic, highly manipulative, someone who could draw people in and kind of infect them with his own warped, self-righteous ideology.
Scary combination. And Wagner.
Yeah.
He sounds like the muscle, the loyal follower.
That's the picture, yeah. Fiercely loyal, second in command, physically imposing, and seemingly just as willing to engage in the, extreme violence.
And Hayden came in later, but crucially, he's the one who actually rented the bank vault in Snowtown.
That's right. He leased the building in early 1999. His role seems to have developed over time, but that Snowtown connection is key.
And it wasn't just these 4, was it? Others got drawn in.
No, definitely not. The records show others were connected, sometimes tragically involved. James Vlassakis' own mother, Elizabeth Harvey, she knew about and even assisted in one of the murders.
Oh my God.
And Jody Elliott, whose son Frederick Brooks later became a victim himself. She was also entangled in the group's orbit early on. It was this network built on control and, frankly, fear.
It's hard to wrap your head around the why. The motivation seems so incredibly complex, almost murky. It wasn't just about money, though, right? Even though they did steal from the victims.
That's right. Money was definitely a factor, but it doesn't feel like the primary driver. What really stands out is Bunting's targeting. He went after people he saw as weak, often folks on welfare, people struggling with drug addiction, homosexual.
And the pedophile angle.
Yes, and that's deeply disturbing because his suspicions were often based on practically nothing. Flimsy evidence, malicious rumors, and the truly awful part is, many victims were people they knew. Friends, partners, even family members.
And there's this overwhelming sense of control and just pure sadism. He apparently got satisfaction from dominating victims, making them call him God or master.
Yeah, that's reported. And there's mention of this really chilling thing called the rock spider wall, like a chart he made, linking names of people he suspected, often baselessly.
So the financial side, getting bank details, Social Security, collecting pensions after they were dead, that was real. How much did they get?
Oh, it was definitely real. They systematically did that. The total figure mentioned is around $97,200 collected that way. But like you said, the sources really suggest the core motivation wasn't the cash. It was The sadism, the absolute control, the twisted ideology Bunting pushed.
The methods.
Yeah.
The details in the sources are just harrowing to read. Victims were lured and then subjected to these prolonged periods of torture before they were killed.
Yeah, sometimes called truth sessions or punishments, which is just a grotesque term for it.
And the specifics, they're incredibly brutal.
They really are. The accounts mention things like electrocution, crushing people's toes with pliers, inserting lit cigarettes, even sparklers into orifices.
God.
There's a detail about injecting bleach into testicles that were wired up to a variac machine, basically for electric shocks. Some victims were found with terrible burns to their genitals. It's pure, calculated cruelty.
They even tried to cover up the disappearances afterwards, didn't they?
Yeah.
Making victims record messages.
Yes, force them to read from scripts. The idea was to play these recordings to family members later, to make it seem like the person was still alive, just moved on somewhere else. Deception on top of the violence.
And disposal.
Yeah.
How did they handle that? It changed over time.
It seems so. Early on, victims like Clinton Tresize or Ray Davies were buried. But as the number grew, they started dismembering bodies to fit them into those barrels. That was the case for Michelle Gardner and Vanessa Lane. And they used acid in the barrels too, presumably to try and speed up decomposition.
To really understand the horror and how it unfolded, maybe we should walk through some specific victim cases mentioned in the sources. It helps put a timeline on it.
Okay, let's start with Clinton Tresize. He seems to be the earliest confirmed victim, killed way back in August 1992.
How was he killed?
The records say he was bashed to death with a shovel. Bunting apparently boasted about it later to Vlassakis, called it his handiwork. His body wasn't actually found until 1994.
Then there was Ray Davies, killed December 95. He was intellectually disabled.
Yes, and the details of his torture are horrific, bashed in the genitals before being strangled. Vlassakis' mother, Elizabeth Harvey, and Wagner were reportedly involved. Like Tresize's body was buried and found much later.
Suzanne Allen. She was one of the bodies found buried in Bunting's yard, wasn't she, in May 99?
That's right, wrapped in plastic bags in Salisbury North. They collected her pension, about $17,000. But interestingly, the murder charges against Bunting and Wagner for her death were eventually dropped. Hung jury.
Michelle Gardner. That case is particularly awful. A transgender woman killed in September 1997. She was targeted because of who she was.
Absolutely. Bunting reportedly used incredibly derogatory language about her. She was strangled, and, they cut off her left foot just so her body would fit in a barrel.
Unbelievable.
And they staged a robbery at her home to try and cover up her disappearance.
Then Vanessa Lane, Wagner's ex-partner, October 97, tortured too.
Yes, crushed toe with pliers, then strangled. She's one of the victims they forced to record that fake message to her mother, saying she was moving interstate.
And her partner, Thomas Trevelyan, was killed just weeks later. He actually helped them kill Vanessa.
He did, yes. But then they turned on him. November 97, he was hanged, and his death was initially ruled a suicide. Apparently, he had a history of attempts and mental health issues, which probably helped them get away with it initially.
Fast forward to September 1998. Frederick Brooks, Jody Elliott's son. The torture described here is some of the worst.
It's truly stomach-churning. Lit cigarettes in his ears, nostrils, a lit sparkler inserted into his urethra, bleach injected into his testicles, wired to the variac, toes crushed. He ended up choking to death on a gag they used. Just barbaric.
And Elizabeth Hayden, Mark Hayden's wife, November 98. Why was she killed?
Bunting reportedly hated her, saw her as a liability because Mark Hayden had apparently told her about the murders. She was dragged into her bathroom, tortured, and killed there. There's a chilling detail mentioned that Mark Hayden allegedly laughed when shown her remains later.
If true, that's monstrous. Finally, David Johnson, James Vlassakis' stepbrother, May 1999.
Yes, Bunting disliked him, used slurs against him. Johnson was lured to the Snowtown bank. They told him he was going there to buy a computer. He's the only victim confirmed to have actually been killed inside the Snowtown bank building.
And there's that truly grotesque detail.
Yes. It's reported Bunting and Wagner fried and actually ate a piece of Johnson's flesh after killing him. It defies comprehension.
So how did this finally unravel? How did the police catch on?
Well, police had been looking into several missing persons cases, and they started seeing connections. The names Bunting, Wagner, and Hayden kept popping up in relation to these missing people.
So they put them under surveillance.
Exactly. And investigators noticed they were making frequent trips between Adelaide and this quiet country town, Snowtown. That raised suspicion. Why were they going back and forth so often?
And then came May 20th, 1999, the day it all broke open.
That's the day. 2 police officers check out this disused bank vault in Snowtown that Hayden and Bunting had leased.
And that's when they found everything.
That's when they were met by that horrific smell and found the barrels. And inside the vault, it wasn't just the bodies. They found tools matching the descriptions of torture thumb restraints, handcuffs, knives, that electric shock machine. The evidence was right there.
And the thinking is they moved the bodies there to Snowtown fairly recently before the discovery.
Yeah.
Because the heat was on in Adelaide.
That's the belief, yes. Moved them in early 1999 because they likely sensed police were getting closer to their activities around Adelaide. And of course, the Snowtown discovery then led police back to Bunting's place in Adelaide, where they found the 2 buried bodies in the yard.
Arrests happened quickly after that.
Bunting, Wagner, and Mark Hayden were arrested the very next day, May 21st, 1999. James Vlassakis was arrested soon after.
The trials must have been incredibly difficult. Longest in South Australian history, some of them.
Absolutely. Incredibly long, harrowing trials that laid bare the full brutal extent of what this group had done over almost a decade.
And the outcomes?
John Bunting, convicted of 11 murders, sentenced to life imprisonment, no parole. Robert Wagner, convicted of 10 murders, also life without parole. Wagner apparently made some statement in court claiming authorities didn't deal with pedophiles, so he took action. Chilling justification.
And Vlassakis. He testified against the others.
He did. Pleaded guilty to 4 murders, became a key witness, received 4 life sentences, but with a 26-year non-parole period. Mark Hayden was convicted of assisting with disposing of 5 bodies, got 25 years with an 18-year non-parole. It's worth remembering the jury was hung on 2 murder charges against Hayden, and they weren't retried after his plea on the disposal charges.
And the Suzanne Allen murder charge against Bunting and Wagner was dropped after a hung jury, too.
That's correct. So not convictions on every single count initially brought, but overwhelming convictions overall.
And there have been recent updates, haven't there, regarding parole?
Yes, there have. Mark Hayden was granted parole in February 2024 and was released from custody from a pre-release center in May 2024. And James Vlassakis, his non-parole period is ending, so he's scheduled for parole consideration sometime in 2025.
Wow. And Snowtown itself. How has the town dealt with this horrific association?
Understandably, it's been incredibly difficult. There is apparently this initial sort of morbid tourism spike, which feels really uncomfortable, but mostly a lasting stigma. They even talked about changing the town's name at one point, trying to escape the connection, but that didn't happen.
Did anything controversial happen with the site itself?
There was some controversy early on about a local shop selling, macabre souvenirs related to the case. The bank building itself, where the barrels were found, was eventually sold along with an attached house. The new owners reportedly put up a plaque to commemorate the victims, which feels like a more respectful approach.
And it's so important to repeat that point. Snowtown, the name, sticks because of the discovery. But the horror wasn't centered there.
Absolutely crucial. The vast majority of the torture, the murders that happened mainly in Adelaide's northern suburbs, Snowtown was, tragically, the final dumping ground.
It's a case that just stays with you. Why do you think it continues to be studied, discussed so much?
I think it forces us to confront the sheer depths of, human depravity. How could something like this happen and go on for so long undetected? It raises disturbing questions about the psychology of perpetrators like Bunting, their ability to manipulate and control, and of course the devastating lasting impact on the victims' families and the whole community.
Yeah, and trying to get any kind of understanding, however difficult, really means looking squarely at the facts, the details, and the sources, like the ones we've been going through here.
Exactly. So just to sum up, we've looked at the core group, led by this really dark figure, John Bunting. We've touched on the, frankly, twisted and sadistic motives, the horrific methods they used, the fact the crime spanned multiple locations near Adelaide, and then that final, awful discovery in Snowtown that brought it all crashing down.
Before we wrap up, we just want to take a moment to ask you, our listeners, if you find these dives valuable, please do consider liking this, sharing it, and subscribing if you haven't already. And we genuinely value your thoughts, so please leave your comments below, respectfully, of course, given the nature of this topic.
Yeah, your engagement really helps us continue doing this.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to mull over. Based on everything we've discussed, how is it that individuals can become so susceptible, fall under the sway of someone like Bunting? What does that reveal about vulnerability, maybe within society?
And also, how can ordinary places, just like a quiet country town or a suburban house, become forever linked to such unspeakable darkness just because they became the setting for hiding monstrous acts? It's definitely something heavy to think about.